So, Ahsoka is the newest Star Wars show to premiere on Disney+. It stars Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano and essentially picks up right after her appearance in Mando Season 2 and Star Wars Rebels. Now, I haven't really loved Star Wars at the moment. In fact, I think it's in the worst state it's ever been right now. Obi-Wan was a massive disappointment. The Book of Boba Fett is a thing that exists. Mandalorian Season 3 was kinda terrible, and unfortunately, Andor was also a bomb despite being some of the best Star Wars we've seen in years. So I've been pretty detached from Star Wars lately, but something still drew me to this project. The Clone Wars made such a lasting impact on me as a kid and played a big part as to why I love stories and films as much as I do today. Besides loving the Clone Wars though, Ahsoka became one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of it. Why? Well, let's get into it. So let's just not waste any time and get into my critiques of Ahsoka. First off is that Ahsoka is a show that's pretty devoid of emotion. Everyone delivers their lines with no charisma or any emotional feeling. It's unfortunate because the cast is pretty great, but everyone is so quiet and monotonous in their tone. This is particularly bad with Ahsoka, especially since she's one of the most charismatic Star Wars characters ever. Rosario Dawson is clearly talented. She's shown in the past that she can be very charismatic, so this is definitely a creative choice to have her do this. I guess she's more of a seasoned and mature Jedi, but do we really have to have her this devoid of emotion? It's weird because she wasn't really like this in Star Wars Rebels, so having her in her own show be like this even though those two aren't that far apart from each other chronologically is kind of strange. I would understand if it was a clear character flaw, perhaps since her training was unfinished, she took a couple of wrong lessons from the Jedi or something, but it's not clearly stated in the show that that's the intent. I mean, she slightly perks up at the end of episode 5, so perhaps that's the point of it, but I still don't really think so. My next problem is that Ahsoka is basically a season 5 of Rebels, and it's a bad thing. And look, I don't hate Rebels, I'm just not quite fond of it, but the problem is that the Ahsoka show doesn't develop the characters organically, but rather it just picks up where Rebels essentially left off. It's hard to have an attachment to them because the show acts as if you already care about the characters instead of actually developing them. And since it's actually an ensemble show, it pulls the focus away from Ahsoka Tano. You know, the titular lead. Star Wars seems to have a problem with this. The Book of Boba Fett turns into The Mandalorian, Mando Season 3 seems more interested in Bo-Katan, a lot of Obi-Wan focuses on Reva, even Andor, which is great, becomes so wide in scope that it's really not about him, which honestly works for that show, but it's still worth pointing out. Ahsoka should be getting the primary focus, yet her arc seems pretty unclear until episode 5, but then it essentially gets resolved in that episode, so I don't know where she's going exactly. Next, the pacing is not great. The first reason why probably has to do with the episode lengths and that they're simply too short. Some of the episodes clock in at around 30 minutes, and it's simply not enough time to fully delve into this world or its characters. And yeah, each episode should have the runtime it needs, whether it's long or short. HBO's Barry, for instance, is a show with 8 episodes per season, and each episode is around 30 minutes in length. Yet that feels perfect for that show. That show paces itself pretty quickly, and it doesn't set up so much that it can be explored within those 30 minutes. Ahsoka kind of treats itself like an hour-long episode that's only 30 to 40 minutes. But to make matters even worse, it's still kind of slow during those 30 minutes. That's the worst combo you could have. It's short and unfulfilling, but it also feels long because the pace of it is pretty slow. And it's mostly just simple stuff, like certain scenes should definitely be cut down, but they just feel a little dragged on. Like, please, just edit out like 30 seconds of this and it'll be so much better. The pacing is also made worse due to how slow characters move and talk, so a lot of it just feels really slow and stiff, to be honest. At least for those first 3 episodes. Next, Ahsoka has a bit of a nostalgia problem. I think a lot of people are won over by the fact that we simply get to see live action Clone Wars, and that's it. Massive Clone Wars fan here, like that is probably my favorite and most influential show of all time, but simply putting my favorite characters and translating them into live action is not enough. They actually need to be fleshed out properly and given enough story to work with, instead of just existing so that the show will generate more chatter online. Watching episode 5 honestly just made me wish I saw everything in animation. For instance, it's so jarring hearing Tamora Morrison do the voices of the clones again instead of D. Bradley Baker. And it's not simply because it's different and I don't like it, it's just that the delivery is not it.
Nice work, Commander. We'll secure the perimeter. Come on, let's go! What the hell was that?
I do want to say that this stuff in episode 5 and probably future episodes have a clear and unfair disadvantage because of the inevitable comparisons that will be made. However, it's beyond simply preferring one over the other because I like the animated versions more. Watching them in live action made me realize that a lot of the charisma and personality that the voice actors gave these characters is just gone. And I know this part isn't a creative decision because of how the dialogue is written. It's written to be like how the Clone Wars characters would talk. For instance, Ahsoka and Anakin often banter a lot with each other, with Anakin mainly being the one to make a lot of jokes, and thankfully that dialogue is implemented in the show.
You look the same.
You look old.
But unfortunately, it just feels a little flat, and I inevitably make the comparison to Matt Lanter, just knowing he'd do a much better job with it. And that's not to knock on Hayden Christensen, he does a good job with other lines, but I'll get to that later. Another thing is that the set pieces clearly have to be hidden because it's too expensive to show on a live action TV show rather than in animation. And lastly, I'm just not as emotionally attached to the live action counterparts here. But don't get me wrong, it's extremely cool seeing Hayden Christensen playing Anakin in the Clone Wars and acting alongside a live action Ahsoka. But part of me is just like, man, I would honestly prefer seeing this animated with Matt Lanter and Ashley Eckstein doing it. Granted, again, I think the actors are just directed poorly. Hayden Christensen actually really surprised me in some instances. It's like he really did try to give a balance with his old performance and mix it in with Matt Lanter's, even sounding a bit like Matt Lanter at some points, which I didn't even think was possible for him.
Hurry up, Nick! You must adjust to the times. You know, teaching's not all it's cracked up to be. I'm joking.
You lack conviction.
Lines like these made it seamless at points. Next, I simply need more from the show. Again, back to the pacing problem, I think episode runtimes are just too short, but most importantly, they feel unsubstantial. This seems to be more of a Disney Plus problem, as all the MCU shows have this issue. I don't know if there's a limit placed by Disney or something, because I have no clue as to why they keep doing this besides maybe saving some money by not filming more, but by the end of episode 5, it's like, I feel like we're on the right track here. Ahsoka is finally getting the center focus that we needed, she's getting a clearer arc, and it's finally becoming more interesting narratively and visually. But then her arc wraps up halfway through the episode and just kind of meanders to set up the next episode for the rest of the runtime. Like, I don't want to be spending all my time with the weird space whales. Again, if it's a budget issue as to why we couldn't see more Clone Wars, just spend less money on the prolonged amount of screen time with the space whales and put it towards the Clone Wars stuff to flesh out that arc more. It's frustrating because, yeah, we do finally get these live action Clone Wars versions of Anakin and Ahsoka, but it felt kind of unsubstantial. I wanted to get more of them interacting and building up that connection, and then it just ends prematurely. There's so much story and reconciliation here that can be explored. Ahsoka never finished her training with Anakin, but most importantly, she never got closure with him. This was the last time they saw each other before their fight in Rebels. Ahsoka should definitely carry an immense amount of trauma and guilt after all of this. If she stayed, Anakin probably never would have turned to the dark side, and she also never got a proper goodbye with him. Then there's this other side of Ahsoka that actually feels like all she was trained for was to be a weapon, which gets worse when she realizes that her teacher, the one who's been guiding her since childhood, became the most fearsome, horrific, and monstrous murderer in the galaxy. Everything she believed in was just torn apart. She was originally brought into the Jedi Order to be a peacekeeper, but for her entire life simply remained a soldier. It makes sense why she's reluctant to train Sabine, because she doesn't want to aid in bringing some more violence to the galaxy. All of this feels like a season's worth of story for Ahsoka, yet her character meanders for 4 episodes with other characters like Sabine taking more center focus. And when Ahsoka finally gets the focus she deserves, we spend a total of like 15 to 20 minutes on it. Yes, it can still be explored, but I feel as if the main weight of it was mostly glossed over. But hey, the show isn't over. Dave Filoni is someone who I hold high respect for after what he did with the Clone Wars, and besides Andor, this is the best Star Wars show so far. Of course, there are still 3 more episodes that need to premiere at the time of writing this, so a lot can change, and I'd love for the show to change my perception of it right now. Lastly, while I love Dave Filoni, I think he's a little too attached to Star Wars. Just a little. I think it's mostly a good thing to have someone who's so passionately in love with Star Wars to be in charge of this stuff, but some sequences like this make me a little hesitant. Like, what even is the point of doing this beyond some fan service and it looking cool? We already get that Ahsoka sees Anakin as Vader and feels some guilt over it based on this shot, which already goes incredibly hard by the way, but this is just overdoing it. I get that seems like a bit of a nitpick, but it's a small part of a larger issue that I worry about. Now, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, as there are some major positives of Ahsoka that I quickly want to mention. First, it actually feels like Star Wars. The shows have been in this weird direction lately, with the more Star Wars-y projects failing to deliver what actual Star Wars fans want, and the only show that was a critical success didn't really feel like Star Wars. Ahsoka is the show that genuinely feels like I'm watching a Star Wars show, with all the familiar characters and the types of stories it's telling. There are a lot more lightsaber duels, training Padawans, and focus on the Force, and there's a lot of familiarity with true and organic Star Wars stories and tropes that I can appreciate. Next, it has a linear story progression and a clear direction. Shows like Boba, Obi-Wan, or Mando have a few episodes where it feels like a complete waste of time. So far, there's no episode like Mandalorian Season 3 where we spent an entire episode getting this child Mandalorian back from this creature, or an Obi-Wan where Leia gets captured for the 10th time, and I don't even remember anything from Boba Fett to make a comparison. But there's a clear objective of finding Ezra, getting the map, and preventing Thrawn's rise to power, and it clearly progresses with each episode. Next, the antagonists are really interesting. Ray Stevenson, rest in peace by the way, plays Baylan Skoll, who is essentially this Sith Jedi hybrid who doesn't really identify as either, kind of like Ahsoka, but definitely more Sith leaning than Jedi leaning. He's interesting because he has a code and isn't just some brute force antagonist. He has his own morals and values and clearly sticks by them. There's this intrigue behind him that actually makes me want to learn a lot more behind him. I also love the character and costume design for him. I take one look at the guy and I'm like, yep, that's a pretty menacing dude right there. His Padawan is pretty fun too. She's a mostly silent antagonist that never really blinks, which is funny to me. She kind of reminds me of a character Pom Klementif, the actress who plays Mantis in the MCU, played in Mission Impossible 7 actually, which is pretty fun. Next, I do feel like Dave Filoni is utilizing the volume better than previous directors have. He clearly knows its limits and knows how to mask its flaws, like the fog in Ahsoka's flashbacks. It makes sense since it's a dirty battlefield and mainly because it's Ahsoka's foggy memories. That and they don't have the budget for it, but he does a good job with what he has. There's also just a bit more diversity in the planets instead of just being on Tatooine, which is incredibly refreshing. It actually also feels like I am on a different planet, which is something that not a lot of Star Wars shows have succeeded in, as sometimes it can just feel like, oh, that's just another place on Earth. Lastly, I do feel like the show is on an upward trajectory. Even though I haven't really loved any of the episodes yet, they do seem to be getting better, and I hope that trend continues. In conclusion, this was not made with malicious intent. I want to love Star Wars very badly, but it's just hard. And I especially wanted to love Ahsoka, as she's one of my all-time favorite fictional characters. What Luke Skywalker means to many people is probably what Ahsoka means to me. She's the Star Wars character I primarily grew up with and heavily resonated with. Her development in the show felt organic, and it was awesome seeing her mature over time. So it definitely brings me no joy to see this character I love so much not done in the way that I had hoped for. I'm still looking forward to what Dave Filoni does next and what he does with his Star Wars movie. I just hope it keeps improving and that Star Wars as a whole can finally live up to its potential. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it came off as primarily negative, but I'm just voicing my honest opinions on it so far. But what do you guys think about the show so far? Do you love it? Do you disagree with my points? Whatever it is, I'd love to know them in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. Peace.